Welcome to today's Daytime Dialogues. I have the great privilege and pleasure to welcome on for a conversation a person who's a friend for a long time, Menachem Butler. For those of you who don't know Menachem Butler, you're missing something because Menachem seems to be everywhere and know everyone. If you just go on his Facebook page, the pictures he posts with some of the most famous scholars and Talmidei Chachamim in the world. That's Menachem. Menachem is the program fellow for Jewish legal studies at the Julius Rabinowitz program on Jewish and Israeli law at Harvard Law School. He's based in Boston. He's also contributing editor at Tablet Magazine and a co-editor of the Sefarim blog, which means he's at the center of all sorts of interesting things. So Menachem, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on board.
Great to be here in your shul, where we'll actually be able to talk, because usually when I've come to your shul, I get shushed during davening for talking.
Yes, no one's going to shush you today, at least. Hopefully we'll be going well. So, Menachem, we were just talking a moment ago before we went live about the very first interaction we had. Now, it's true. I knew your grandparents pretty well. They had connections to Chicago and to KINS way back when through the Lennon family, and your father and all the other famous Butlers. And there are a lot of Butlers from Pittsburgh, from Squirrel Hill, one of the leading families. But what was the first time we met?
I believe I was an undergraduate at Yeshiva University. It must have been 2003, 2004. And I asked you whether it's true that Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel was a student at Ida Crown. And I think the email went through Dov Carroll, who's my cousin-in-law Ish, Ira Carroll's brother. I was married to my cousin Shoshi from Pittsburgh. And you sent me his Rav Nosson Tzvi's yearbook page, not just the photo. And I mean, to this day, every few months, I'll get a WhatsApp message with that screenshot and say, "Oh, have you seen this?" And I laugh. I think to myself, if only Rav Matenki and I knew back then, how many times around the world this page would go. And I think that really just speaks to the fact of, your willingness and openness to, connect with the various communities and people who've emerged from within the community, and to be unabashedly proud.
No, it's a lot of fun. And by the way, it wasn't too long ago where you convinced me to speak at the law school in a wonderful seminar that was created, a multi-day seminar regarding halakha. What exactly, though, do you do? In other words, what is the Julius Rabinowitz program on Jewish law and Israeli law at Harvard Law School?
So the Julius Rabinowitz program on Jewish and Israeli law is an academic program at Harvard, similar to other academic programs at Harvard and at other universities around America and around the world, devoted to religious law. And our program is on Jewish law and Israeli law. Jewish law is not Israeli law, Israeli law is not Jewish law. There are interactions and overlaps. And the program began the early stages of the program began about 10 years ago. I reached out to Professor Noah Feldman, who's a professor at Harvard Law School. He had previously been on a panel with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs and Professor Alan Dershowitz. And as Professor Feldman often describes the scene, that after the event, a number of students who were then at the Harvard Law School, alumni of yeshivas, prominent yeshivas from Eretz Yisrael and America, started reaching out to him and asking him questions about some of the opportunities for utilizing their past Torah learning and base medrash learning, and whether there could be some sort of opportunity for them to do that at Harvard. Around that same time, I reached out to Professor Feldman with this idea of this program. It took a few years to get off the ground. At the time, I was living in New York, and I would commute up from New York during the semester for classes. And then about 7 years ago, we raised a Baruch Hashem, a multi-million-dollar endowment from the Julius family in California. And the Julius Rabinowitz is the same family. And we've been existing ever since. We have classes, conferences, events, lectures. And the event where you spoke was an amazing example of Jewish thinkers, writers, activists to all come to a conference for several days and to each present from their perspective and to be in conversation and listen to each other and argue with each other and question and answer. And that's the Progressive Halakha Conference was one example. We've had all types of conferences over the years.
It was a fascinating experience just walking into Harvard Law School and thinking of paper chase. When you walk into that lecture room and then have to speak from that lecture room. But you've met so many people. It's amazing of how you have found your way to various personalities. Of all the famous people you've met, who do you think is the person who interaction may not be the most famous, but was the most meaningful to you?
Towards the start of COVID, I wrote an obituary for Marvin Schick, Dr. Marvin Schick, Zichrono Livracha, and he passed away it was a Thursday night, and I stayed up all night. I couldn't fall asleep. And Marvin Schick was an activist, a visionary for Jewish education and for the Jewish community from across the spectrum of denominations. And I wrote an article. I wrote an obituary for Tablet, literally overnight. And as I was writing the obituary, I remembered an encounter that I had with him, where he told me about when he was a student in the Lakewood Yeshiva, Rav Aaron Cutler took him out of the Beis Medrash and brought him with him on various chinuch atzmai efforts and other forms of communal askanas. And Marvin said that Rav Aaron would say that a Marvin Schick outside of the Beis Medrash would mean less Bittul Torah inside of the Beis Medrash. And I brought Marvin when I was at Gruss to speak at Gruss, and after the lecture, we went out to dinner, and he said to me, he's like, Menachem, don't worry. I know that Menachem Butler outside of the Beis Medrash means less Bittul Torah inside the Beis Medrash. And I mention that only because I don't see the world as an outside of the Beis Medrash or inside of the Beis Medrash. I think that the Beis Medrash has been expanded. I think that, while you're physically now sitting in the synagogue, because of your background, the synagogue is really all over. And when I say all over, I don't mean it is concluded. I mean, it is all around, everywhere. Yeah, it's like, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein's essay on the end of learning in the early, the first time it was published, or the first time it was delivered, he began by saying that he's not calling for the cessation of Talmud Torah. He's referring to what is the end that one ought to get within learning. So I'm not saying that the Beis Medrash is over, but really that it's all over, and that everybody everywhere in the world has access to people to speak with and to learn from. And but Marvin is somebody who I miss. I miss talking to him. I miss hearing him yell at me. I miss hearing his feedback. I miss hearing his reactions to ideas, and also learning from him and reading his articles. And
it was fascinating. He, on the one hand, he created the RJJ Journal on contemporary halacha. He was the fundraiser for RJJ as the president for so many years of Yeshiva Rabbi Yaakov Yosef. He was the consultant to Avichai Foundation on Jewish education, and created that every few years he would create the population study, or the demographic study on the Jewish day schools. And
yeah, he had the most focused mission and goal. He wanted to know how many Jewish kids are in Jewish schools. He could tell you. You'd have some Satmar, Bubba, Bells. He'll tell you exactly how many kids are in the schools, and that's better than any other survey. It's not going to be, as broad, unfortunately, reflective of the American Jewish community. But that was actually one of the things that he was very pained by, of the lack of Jewish education going really from across the board, wall to wall, and it pained him when schools shut down. And his articles over the years. I mean, a number of years ago, I was going through the Jewish press on microfilm, where he would write articles, and I prepared several thousand pages of his articles for him and his family. And somebody wrote a letter to the editor saying, how dare Marvin Schick, blah, 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 whatever. And his response was, I dare. Just like, he remained focused on his mission. He remained focused on his, strengthening his community, his institutions. And also, and his son Avishik, who's now the president of the RJJ school, continues this mission in terms of he would handwrite letters to all the donors and supporters of the RJJ school, the Rabbi Yaakov Yosef school system. And Marvin told me once that he once received a donation because somebody said, I feel bad that RJJ has a president who has such terrible handwriting. Maybe if we need to raise some more money so that he can learn how to write. No, but he was an amazing person. He was remarkable. And he was one of the early people who I connected with and who, I guess he saw something in me. And, I often think about him, so that's.
And you're working, you work very closely with Professor Noah Feldman. For those who don't know, during the trials in Congress regarding former President Trump and the whole issues that came up with the constitutionality, Noah Feldman was one of the expert witnesses that testified in Congress. He's a major figure. He's a graduate of the Maimonides School. I remember the interactions at that conference you had invited me to. He can learn with the best of them and argue with the best of them. How is it working with him?
It's amazing. He, in fact, when he was testifying in Congress that week, last year, we have a reading group that meets on campus every other week during the semester. And that week was whatever semester was, semester topic might have been mysticism and the law. And so he spends, a good several hours going through the Marmakomos prior to the class, preparing the sources. And he told us that week in class, in front of all the students, he said, the learning that I did preparing for this, for the class this week, it was like a Shabbos for me. It was just to be able to turn off from everything else that was happening in the world and to just really delve in to the learning. It's been great. Professor Feldman has been, he's been a mentor, a friend, really creating a space for any Jewish person in our program, and really anybody who comes to the program, non-Jews as well, to participate and to understand the materials, the ideas from their perspective, and everybody's perspective has a value to add and to contribute and to critically engage with.
What's your favorite project you're working on right now? Because you aren't limiting yourself, quote unquote, just to Harvard. You always have something else happening. What else is happening right now?
So I've been at Harvard now, working on this project for close to 10 years, full-time, living on campus, living in Cambridge for the past 7 years. I'm also an editor at Tablet Magazine, which is an online newspaper, journal, magazine, whatever you want to call it. Some days I get attacked by the left, some days I get attacked by the right. I guess I'm doing something well if, people's like, how could you be involved in that sort of thing? I'm like, wait, just which side are you criticizing me on? Thank you. So I've been at Tablet, focusing primarily on the arts and culture and the history sections, bringing together scholars, lay people, interesting people who have what to share with others who are perhaps a little different than them. And if they can say it with their name on the record, putting it in print, we want to hear from them. So I've been working on that for almost 10 years now as well. And then last year during COVID, I started a publishing house with a friend of mine, Rabbi Dr. David Shabtai from Boca Raton, Florida. He's published a number of Sfarim, a number of books, brilliant Talmid Chacham. He has a book called Defining the Moment about end of life in Halacha and Jewish law. And he actually has a haskama there from Rabbi J. David Bleich, who one year for Purim, I thought about making like a costume for David for like the haskama on the front and the back. And it's one of the only haskamas that I've seen that Rabbi Bleich has written. And really just that tells you about the significance and brilliance of David Shabtai. So he and I started this publishing house, and it's a boutique publishing house named Shaiki Press in memory of my great uncle, Uncle Shaiki Bard, B-A-R-D. He was from Boston. And Uncle Shaiki was a fascinating, brilliant thinker, writer. He was also an extra in TV and movies. Fascinating fellow. Growing up, he would spend Yom Tovim with us, family simchas. And when I wanted to create this publishing house, I figured, let me honor Uncle Shaiki. So for the first book that we published, it's a small little pamphlet, and it was in honor of it is in honor of the 80th birthday of Rav Hershel Schachter. And I was in Brooklyn at a farm store, not Beagle Eisen, although I do go to Beagle Eisen. There's a Borough Park's farm store quite frequently. This was a smaller bookstore called Mizrahi Books, Rabbi Yisrael Mizrahi. And he mentioned to me that Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik had delivered delivered an address at a Lubavitch dinner in 1942. And I was fascinated by this because I'd never really heard about it. Upon a little research, I saw that it was quoted, that a Yiddish address had been translated to Hebrew and published in a Kfar Chabad publication a number of years ago. And Rabbi Mizrahi had mentioned that there was a Yiddish transcription of this address. So I went to Crown Heights and I went to the library at the Agudas Chasidei Chabad. I met with Rabbi Bar Levin, who's the librarian there. And I asked him if he has a copy of the dinner journal that they put out. Well, actually, the two things. They did a dinner journal, and then for those who didn't make it to the dinner, they printed a small booklet of the speeches that were delivered. And the Yiddish address was there. I arranged for a friend of mine to translate the address, and then we put out a little book called Defying Laws of Nature, Yiddish address by Rav Joseph B. Soloveitchik Zatzal, delivered at the 45th anniversary dinner of the United Lubavitcher Yeshivot, 29 Sivan 5702, translated and published on the occasion of the 80th birthday of Rav Hershel Schachter, 4 Av 5781. That's the full title. I believe as my dear friend, Rabbi Aaron Katz, who's married to Mrs. Molly Elkins Katz, a former teacher at Ada Crown. As he pointed out to me, he's like, you couldn't make the title a little longer. I said, no, this is long enough. And we just printed with a little introduction, the English translation, the Yiddish transcription, and then the facsimile of the address. Now, as soon as this came out, and we published it with Shaiki Press, that's our logo, and it's available on Amazon. And I also made a PDF available. We sent it around WhatsApp, and we're not doing this to make money. I mean, we might be making a few dollars here and there, but we're doing this to get ideas out. And this was the first book. We just wanted to see how it could get done. Could we do it? What would be involved? From there, we made a list of a number of other projects to work on. We have some Sfarim in the works. We're dealing with the authors now, reprinting books from some 25 years ago that are fully out of print. So that we should be announcing shortly. But also we partnered with Religious Zionists of America, Mizrahi, and they have an amazing project. You have an amazing project, Rabbi Matanki, in your professional capacity there, partnering with some Mizrahi partners with the Surba, Ben Zion Al-Ghazi, and Surba and the folks at Eretz Chemda and Eretz Yisrael to produce these amazing Surba volumes, these chaburas, these shiurim, these, anybody can pick this up. Any person can learn with their children, grandchildren, siblings, teachers, students, rabbis, congregants, educators. It's an amazing thing. And it's been a little difficult to purchase them in America. I mean, there is a way to purchase them, and there has been, and chaburas have been sprouting up in different communities. But we've now working together with Mizrahi, Shaiki Press is producing them and selling them on Amazon. And just this week, and I'll just finish with this point on this point. The beauty of Sorba is there are several hundred pages of chaburas. In one of the volumes, there's a section about Hanukkah, Hilchos Hanukkah. And Rabbi Ari Rakoff, and Rabbi Ron Palachuk were in Boston several weeks ago, meeting different community members and schools and shuls. And that day we heard the passing of Mr. Aaron Feuerstein, who was a pillar of the Boston Jewish community. And immediately we reached out to Rabbi David Hellman from the Young Israel Brookline, and Sorba and Mizrahi partnered with the Young Israel Brookline to put out this volume of Hilchos Hanukkah in memory of, it's called the Sorba Mirabanan, et cetera, the Aaron Feuerstein Memorial Volume, dedicated by the Young Israel Brookline, Halachot of Hanukkah 5782, Tafshin Pei Beis. And it includes the shiurim from Hanukkah that had already appeared in Sorba, and as well as Rabbi Hellman's eulogy for Aaron Feuerstein, and a letter of Mechtav Bracha from Rabbi Hellman, etc. And this PDF is available. It's been shared with members of the Brookline community and other shuls, as well. If people want to purchase the book, it's available on Amazon. Get 2-day shipping.
the amazing thing, which you are leaving out of this process, is the way that technology works, that between saying you want to put out this book and putting out this book, 48 hours?
It was 22 hours, 22 hours from the moment that our team at Shaiki Press submitted the final manuscript to the print on demand at Amazon. I mean, based on the relationships that we had worked out ahead of time, that we were able to just put this out.
It was basically overnight. The idea came, it was approved, it happened. Yeah. It's absolutely amazing that something like this can happen with technology today, and that's part of what you do. Now, behind you, by the way, there is something else. I noticed the tsurba. There's a doll behind you. I didn't expect to see one.
Yes, this is the new Thank You Hashem doll. There's a whole movement going on in contemporary Judaism now, within Orthodoxy, the Thank You Hashem, and I think some people might think it's scoff at it and what are these jokes? Thank You Hashem. No, it's a beautiful, Mavakshe Hashem. People trying to keep Hashem in our focus at all times.
All based around the song.
So it's not based around the song. The song emerged in tandem with it, but there are a number of manhigim within the Orthodox community. Some are referred to them as, the Neo Hasidus Chaver of Moshe Weinberger being one of the prime mentors, and others. And the Thank You Hashem Chaver, they have merch, they have hats, they made a doll, they have all sorts of swag, and it's it's an amazing. When I walk around, now I'm able to go back to the library for 18 months during COVID. All the university libraries were closed. And I walk around with my hat that says, Thank You Hashem on it. And, some people walk by, they're like, what does that hat say?
It's something about the Jordanians. It's the Hashem.
The Hashem. Yeah. So it's actually, it's actually, look, it's the first, the Rambam. It's, acknowledgement, recognition of God in this world. But it's just a way to bring a smile to my face.
No, it does bring those smiles. I don't exactly imagine you with that hat on, but I'm sure it must be fascinating. Oh, you have it right there?
Somewhere. I'll find it.
Okay.
Actually, you know what? I'll send you a hat. We're gonna.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I'll be wearing it, so I apologize up front. So, Menachem, if you're looking at American Jewry, you're in a real interesting place because you're in academia and you can get away because of who you are and where you sit, with having in the same room people from a Haredi community, people from a modern Orthodox community, people from the LGBTQ community, people who are intermarried, people who are every brand, every flavor of Judaism in one room. How do you get them all together? Is it the Harvard thing or is it the Menachem Butler thing? Or is there something in between?
Well, I think that there's an element of recognizing that they're there. The American Jewish community is here. They're all here. The question that you're asking is, how come they're here, where the people are not coming into our existing infrastructures? So if your question is, why are they not coming into the base medrash, or why are they not coming into a shul? Well, why are we not going into their base medrash or their shuls? And then at that point, everything gets into turf wars. The program that you spoke on was a conference on progressive halakha. And the approach was that every community within Judaism has an element of progressivisms within halakha. Of course, the title of the conference is a controversial title. Some people had asked maybe we could have toned down the title name, and then maybe they would consider coming. And so this is what the conference is about. We also had a conference a number of years ago about the Haram al-Sharif in Temple Mount, where we had Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians, and Americans participating in a conference. We've had a conference about transgender and religious law and Islam and Judaism. We're able to bring different communities together because of this neutral space of a university setting. And I do think that universities need to maintain this neutrality and need to be a place where people can have these conversations. And in the Jewish community, it was great that there were representatives from every self-identifying Jewish community were in that room. There were Haredim there were modern Orthodox, there were Orthodox, conservative, reform, reconstructionists, Israeli Americans. It's amazing. And I think when people can talk to each other and be willing to listen,
But it's not so much a turf war. In other words, that can happen. First of all, I think there's one piece, it's Harvard Law School. So you get an invitation from Harvard Law School and you say, you open up the invitation. But it is by definition neutral because it is academia, even though not all academic settings are such any longer. But it can't be. When I walk into my base medrash has an identity to it. And it's different than the base medrash of someone else. So there's a unique space you occupy.
So we're not trying to create a ideological movement. We're not trying to create one movement over the other. We're trying to create a smorgasbord, as it were, a place where people can study and encounter and learn about other worldviews and also about their own worldviews.
Is there anything that you would consider in your role as being beyond the bounds?
Yeah. Holocaust denial, it's a bad thing. Advocating for harming, hurting, murdering other people. Those are pretty extreme. But if you're asking me professionally at Harvard, that's, obviously I'm just a person who works here.
Right.
But places where I feel comfortable participating in, moving within the Jewish community. In this year alone, there's a book that's coming out in a few weeks by Professor David Myers and Professor Noah Stolzenberg from California. It's a book about the history of Kiryas Joel. And I was involved in connecting them, and they mentioned me in the acknowledgements of connecting them with a number of the stakeholders in the Satmar communities, both communities of Satmar. It wasn't about me pushing to one demographic over the other, or one community over the other. That's within Satmar.
But how did you get to Satmar?
I was in Uman. I'm sorry, I was in Uman as well. I was in Meron for Lag BaOmer when I was in Grus. And a friend of mine in America told a friend of his, who's a Hasidic guy from Satmar, who's going to Meron. He said, my friend Menachem Butlers is going to be there. Maybe you'll see him. There are tens of thousands or more of Jews on Lag BaOmer and Meron. And naturally we found each other. And he's like, oh, you're Menachem Butlers. A friend of mine said that I should meet you. And we became friends. And he's a person within the Satmar community. He's hosted me for Shabbosim. When new Sfarim come out from within the Satmar community, new printings of Vayol Moshe and others, he'll send me copies to see. And, just it's connecting on common interests and also on respecting that, we each have our own conception of our Masorah.
Which is it's a great example, because very often you find people who are crossing boundaries and they don't have their own identity. They kind of remain neutral, where it's pretty clear who you are and what your Masorah is.
Yeah, Moshe Weinberger gave a shiur many years ago where he was referring to the Sfarim shelves in the YU library on the 5th floor, probably 5A. And he said, if all the Sfarim could sit together on the shelves of the YU library, then so too the Sfarim should be able to sit together in my heart and mind as well. And that captures a lot. It's always a balance. It's always I don't even want to call it a tightrope walk. It's a balance. It's walking on several tightropes at the same time, maybe. Learning from different communities and also constantly growing and constantly seeing developments and seeing new stuff. And it's recalibrating oneself is always important. Maintaining a connection with mentors from different communities is important. And also just, thinking.
I do wonder what it would be if you walked into Kiryas Joel with your Thank You Hashem hat on. But my guess is they would like that as well.
Look, you tell me next time you're in New York, you and I will go up to Kiryas Joel. And I will, you're not going to put on the hat, but I'll, it's
One of my favorite stories when we were building the Eruv in West Rogers Park. So we worked with Rav Vosner Zatzal out of Bnei Brak, and I met with him in his Bezdin, and I went there, and I wore a jacket, but I didn't have a tie with me in Israel at the time. So open collar jacket, I met with him. And then when I had to meet with him when he was visiting his son in Muncie, I walked into the room and his shamus stopped me, said, "Where's your hat?" I said, "I don't have a hat." He said, "You can't meet him without a hat on." There is a picture out there, which I guard very carefully, of me with a black hat on in order to meet with him. But sometimes these different costumes we wear are very artificial and very much dependent on where we are located at the time.
When I was a kid, I thought of this story a few weeks ago. When I was a kid, our family went to a simcha in Muncie at Rabbi Temler Zichron Livracha shul, and after davening on Friday night, we all lined up to shake his hand, and he looks at me, and I must have been a teenager. He looks at me, he says, "Your shirt is dirty." And I looked at it like, Shabbos had just started, and the shirt's not dirty. He's like, "It's a blue shirt. Why don't you clean it up and wear a white shirt tomorrow?" So it's just like, it's important to, dress the part as well sometimes. But actually in that night as well, the other memory that I remember was we were waiting for dinner to start I think it was an Ofruf. And as Rabbi Tendler and his Rebbitzin came down the stairs, my parents pointed out to me, they said, "That's Rav Moshe's daughter." It's like, she grew up, she's royalty. She grew up in the house of the Gadol Adar. It was just like that, that having that connection and just interacting with somebody. And I think just in the people who I try to interact with, professors, rabbis, educators, just, what their Masorah is, what their connection is. And try to understand it from there.
That's very much who you are, and very much why so many of us are drawn to maintain a relationship with you, because you know those people, you respect them, you guard them, and also you open up the door so others can get to meet them as well. Menachem, on this, I apologize, but our time's all up, and I could go on for a long time more. Your work on Surah is great. I didn't mention the Sfarim blog, which I can't figure out how that level of scholarship happens so frequently. And you're the
Sfarim blog. We have to have a whole separate conversation about the Sfarim blog. It's an amazing opportunity for people to
Harvard.
Learn
it's
the
amazing.
internet.
It's amazing. And thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Tanki. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you. Bye-bye.